When my husband came home from his wedding with his new wife, he found nothing but an empty field. My name's Caroline Hayes, and this is how I erased him. 6 months earlier, I was still folding his shirts. The house smelled of coffee and cedar wood, the same smell it had every morning for 27 years. Richard Hayes would walk down the stairs with that practiced smile, the one he used for clients and neighbors, and me when he remembered. That morning felt ordinary until it wasn't. His phone buzzed on the counter while he showered. I wasn't snooping, not at first. But when the screen lit up, the words glowed like a wound. "Can't wait for our honeymoon, babe. Tiffany." I stared at it, waiting for logic to make sense of it. Honeymoon? I was his wife. We hadn't even planned an anniversary dinner, let alone another wedding. When he stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his neck, I was holding the phone. He froze. "Caroline, it's not what you think," he said, that salesman tone slipping into panic. But it was exactly what I thought. He'd met Tiffany Miller at a corporate event, 26, blonde, ambitious, the kind of woman who still thought charm could substitute for character. While I paid bills and ran payroll for Hayes Contracting, he'd been running off to site visits with her. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. Instead, I nodded and said, "I see." Because I did see all of it. That night, after he left to clear his head, I poured a glass of wine and opened the family file cabinet. I'd been the one to handle every contract, every mortgage, every account. The company, the house, the cars, I knew exactly whose name was on which line. Mine. He never paid attention to paperwork. He just signed where I told him. That was his first mistake. Over the next weeks, I moved quietly. I met with my attorney, Marianne Lopez, who looked at the documents and said, "Caroline, if this is all correct, you own everything." "I know," I said. "We built a plan, a slow, silent exit. I sold the company property first, the vacation cabin, the beach lot, under a new LLC. Then the house, listed privately to a developer who wanted the land, not the memories. Richard thought I was renovating. He didn't notice the contractors were surveyors measuring for demolition. Every lie he'd ever told became a brick in the wall I was building between us. On the day of his so-called wedding in Italy, I sat on the hood of my car across the street from our soon-to-be-gone home. The demolition crew waited for my signal. One text, "Go." The sound was thunder. The roof caved in on years of holidays and arguments and quiet heartbreak. Dust rose like smoke, gray and final. By the time Richard and Tiffany flew back a week later, there was nothing left but an empty lot surrounded by a temporary fence. Their dream home, their symbol of victory, gone. And when he called, voice cracking through the phone, demanding answers, I simply said, "Welcome home." Then I hung up. It wasn't rage that guided me anymore. It was clarity. The kind that comes when a woman realizes the life she protected for decades was never hers to begin with. For the first time in years, the air felt light. The silence, peaceful. But as I stood there watching the dust settle, I knew this was only the first act. Because revenge isn't complete when you take back what's yours. It's complete when they finally understand why you did it. And Richard Hayes was about to learn everything. Rehook for part 2. He thought losing the house was punishment enough. He didn't know that the real demolition was still coming, and this time it would happen to his life. The air was thick with humidity and shock when I stepped out of my car. The slam of the door sliced through the stillness. sharp enough to make them all turn. Richard froze first. Tiffany's designer heels sank slightly into the dirt where our lawn used to be. And the kids, Samantha filming on her phone, Logan looking lost, stood like figures in a photograph that no one wanted framed. "Caroline," Richard's voice cracked. What have you done?" I walked forward, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes. "Good afternoon. How was Italy?" Tiffany's mascara was already streaking. "Where's our house? You can't just destroy someone's home." "Oh, sweetheart." My tone came out softer than I expected. "It was never your home." Richard's face flushed an angry red. "Caroline, this was my property." I lifted a folder from my bag and held it up between us like a mirror. "Actually, it was mine, bought with my inheritance. You were only ever a guest, Richard." He blinked hard, disbelief, fighting paperwork. "That's impossible." "No," I said, voice steady. "It's legal and final." For a beat, all anyone could hear was the wind whistling through the temporary fencing. Then Samantha lowered her phone slightly. "Mom, did you really sell the house?" "Not just sold, honey. Cleared. The new owners wanted a clean slate." Logan exhaled through his teeth. "This is insane. Where are we supposed to go?" I turned to him, a small ache tightening behind my ribs. "Your things are in storage, paid through the month. After that, it's up to you." His disappointment flickered across his face, confusion, a hint of fear. And for an instant, something inside me twisted. Then, Richard's voice cut through the moment. "You'll regret this," he said, stepping closer. "You've destroyed this family." My pulse jumped, but I didn't move. I felt the weight of 27 years pressing against my ribs. Birthdays, apologies, the quiet way I used to wait for him to come here. It all condensed into a single breath. "No," I said, that breath turning to steel. "You destroyed it when you traded loyalty for lust. I just signed the paperwork." Tiffany gasped. "You're crazy." I met her glare. "Careful, I'm recording this conversation." Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She turned to Richard, searching for backup, but he was staring at the dirt where the house once stood, his empire reduced to rubble and weeds. The silence between us was thick, almost sacred. My reflection shimmered faintly in the car window beside me. Calm face, trembling fingers. I tucked my hand into my coat pocket so no one would see it shake. Richard spoke again. "Quieter now. You think this makes you powerful?" "No," I said. "It makes me free." I walked past them, the smell of dust and cut wood clinging to the air. Behind me, I heard Samantha whisper, "Mom, why?" I paused but didn't turn. "Because sometimes," I said, "the only way to rebuild is to start from nothing." When I slid into the driver's seat, I caught a final glimpse in the rearview mirror. Tiffany's hands on her hips, Richard standing motionless, Samantha staring after me. Logan kicked a small rock into the dirt, the sound echoing like a heartbeat. I started the engine. The vibration steadied me. This wasn't revenge, it was release. Every betrayal he'd hidden behind his smile. Every year I'd swallowed disappointment. It all burned away with that house. But as I drove off, my reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Not angry, not sad, just awake. And somewhere deep down I knew he wasn't finished. Men like Richard never accept defeat. They reload it. He thought losing the house was the end. He didn't know I still held the keys to something far more valuable, his future. I didn't drive home that afternoon. Technically, I didn't have a home anymore. What I had was silence and a clean horizon. Instead, I stopped at the small cafe near the courthouse, the one that always smelled faintly of roasted beans and rain. The bell over the door chimed as I walked in. The sound felt almost delicate against the noise in my head. I ordered black coffee, no sugar. I'd stopped sweetening things weeks ago. When Marianne arrived, her umbrella dripping on the tile, she gave me that knowing smile. "So," she said, sliding into the booth, "how did it go?" I stirred my coffee, though it needed nothing. "Let's just say he didn't expect demolition to be literal." Her laugh was low, proud. "You're officially untouchable, Caroline. The sale, the permits, airtight. He can rant all he wants." "Good," I said, "because I'm not done yet." She raised an eyebrow. "Not done?" "Poetry," I murmured. "It deserves a final verse." While Richard had been busy posing as a self-made man, I'd been quietly managing every account. I knew his secret withdrawals, his impulsive spending, every dinner and diamond meant to impress Tiffany. $45,000 of ego, documented down to the cent. But even victory can taste like ash. When Marianne left, I stayed. The cafe emptied. The barista wiped down counters, and the faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. That's when my phone buzzed, a text from Samantha. "Mom, Dad's posting about you. Tiffany too. You might want to check Instagram." I opened the app. There she was, Tiffany, standing in front of the demolished lot, mascara perfect again, captioned, "When jealous exes can't let go, pray for us." Hundreds of comments bloomed beneath it. Sympathy emojis, hashtags. People who knew nothing of the truth deciding who the villain was. I didn't cry. I screenshot. My thumb moved calmly, methodically. Click, save, click. Every insult became evidence. I sent them to Marianne. 10 minutes later, she texted back. "Perfect. Defamation, harassment. Keep collecting." By the time the rain eased, my phone was full of receipts, digital and emotional. Yet beneath the cold satisfaction, a hollow ache opened wide. The cafe smelled of coffee grounds and wet pavement. It reminded me of nights years ago when Richard and I would stop here after late meetings. He'd laugh, flirt with the waitress, touch my hand across the table. I used to believe that warmth was love. Now, remembering it felt like staring at a photograph of strangers. I sat there until closing, listening to the hiss of the espresso machine, the lock clicking on the door. The loneliness was thick enough to taste. Outside, the air was sharp with ozone. I stood under the awning and dialed the number I'd deleted 100 times. Richard's. He answered on the second ring, voice low and dangerous. "You think you can erase me?" "I didn't erase you, Richard," I said softly. "You did that yourself. You'll regret this, Caroline. You'll regret everything." "Funny," I said, watching the rain gather in the gutter. "You said the same thing the day I found your messages." He hung up. For a moment, I just stood there, the phone cooling in my hand, the streetlight turning puddles into small, trembling mirrors. Marianne's voice echoed in my memory. "You're untouchable now." But I knew better. Men like Richard never stop at losing. They look for loopholes. When I finally drove to my temporary apartment, the city glowed behind a curtain of mist. My key scraped the lock, the scent of new paint filling the empty rooms. I poured wine into a paper cup, leaned against the window, and whispered to the reflection looking back at me. Had I gone too far? Or not far enough? Tomorrow I would decide. Tomorrow I would show Richard something that would end every illusion he'd ever built. A truth hidden in our finances that would prove who had really been that would prove who had really been running his empire all along. And once he saw it, he'd finally understand the woman he'd underestimated. He thought the house was his biggest loss until he discovered the company he bragged about for 20 years was never his to begin with. The morning sun broke through my blinds like a spotlight, slicing across the paper spread over my kitchen table. Contracts, deeds, signatures. My proof. By the time I met Marianne downtown, the city was awake and humming. The courthouse cafe buzzed with lawyers and caffeine. The air smelled like paper, ink, and ambition. Marianne slid a folder toward me, her nails tapping against the cover. Here it is. Registration, tax filings, payroll records. You are the sole proprietor of Hayes Contracting. I traced the embossed seal with my thumb. My father's name wasn't on it. My husband's wasn't either. Just mine. She smiled, the corner of her mouth curving like a secret. You ready to show him what? You ready to show him what you've built? More than ready. I arrived at the office just before noon. Richard's truck sat crooked in the lot. The same one I'd bought him for our 20th anniversary. He was inside, pacing behind the glass walls of my office, barking into his phone. Through the pane, I could see the tension in his shoulders, the twitch in his hand when he spotted me. I didn't knock. He hung up mid-sentence, eyes narrowing. What are you doing here? Checking on my business, I said, crossing the threshold. His laugh came sharp and brittle. Your business? You finally lost it. I dropped the folder on the desk. The papers fanned out like cards in a winning hand. Read them. He flipped through the pages, color draining from his face. No, this can't be right. My name's not. Where's my signature? You don't have one, I said evenly, because it's not your company, Richard. It never was. He slammed his hand against the desk. The sound echoed through the glass walls. You're lying. I leaned in just enough for him to see the calm in my eyes. I was there when we filed the incorporation papers. You were golfing. You wanted to celebrate later. Remember? His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. I could almost see the moment he replayed that day in his head. The champagne, the handshake, the flash of pride as I handed him a business card with his name printed under my company. He'd loved the illusion. I'd loved the control. Caroline, this is theft, he spat. You can't just take this from me. I shrugged. You can't lose what you never owned. He started pacing again, the way he used to when bad deals went south. Palm rubbing the back of his neck, words muttered through clenched teeth. You'll regret this. You always take things too far. A flicker of something. Not triumph, but memory passed through me. I remembered the nights I'd bring him coffee at the office, his tie loosened, his eyes tired but kind. For a moment, I'd believed we were partners. That memory stung like smoke in my lungs. I pushed it away. This isn't revenge, I said quietly. This is correction. He stopped pacing and stared at me, a long, empty stare. You're a bitter woman. And you're a man who just found out he's been living off his wife's paycheck for 18 years. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The silence that followed was almost beautiful. I turned toward the door, the smell of dust and motor oil mixing with the faint hum of the office AC. Behind me, he muttered something low, too quiet to catch, but I didn't need to hear it. The threat was in his tone. Outside, the air was brighter, hotter. My pulse finally slowed as I slid into my car. I texted Marianne 2 words, Phase 2 complete. Her reply came seconds later. He'll strike back. Be ready. The message glowed against the sunlight streaming through my windshield. I smiled. Let him. Because for the first time in nearly 3 decades, I wasn't standing behind Richard Hayes. I was standing above him. He thought he could destroy my name online, but I was about to destroy his reputation in court. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Notifications pulsed like heartbeats, pings of judgment in my palm. Tiffany had posted a tearful video. In it, she stood at the edge of what used to be our front yard, sunlight catching the shimmer of her engagement ring. Some women just can't let go. She sniffed into the camera. They destroy because they're jealous. Pray for us. The caption read, "Peace not petty, peace not petty." Her voice quivered just right. The comments flooded in. Poor girl, she's the victim here. Imagine being that bitter. The ex-wife looks unhinged. Each word sliced a little. I'd built a life on quiet competence, and now strangers reduced me to a meme. For a few minutes, I let the ache in. It burned behind my ribs like acid until it cooled into something sharper. I took a breath, steadied my hand, and hit record on my own phone. "There's no jealousy here," I said, my voice calm. "Only truth. You can't steal what was never yours." Then I sent every screenshot of their lies to Marianne. Within minutes, she texted back, "Perfect. Defamation, harassment, keep everything." I closed my curtains, the phone screen casting a pale glow across the living room. Outside, thunder rolled low, like the world holding its breath. The next morning, the humidity was heavy, metallic. I met Marianne at her office to sign a cease and desist notice. She tapped her pen against the paper. "You sure you want to hand deliver this?" "Yes," I said. "Let them look me in the eye." By noon, the construction site was humming with drills and voices. Dust shimmered in the sunlight, and the smell of hot concrete clung to the air. Richard and Tiffany were there, surrounded by workers and a small local news crew. Tiffany's phone was raised again, camera light blinking red. "We just want to rebuild," she said softly to the lens, resting her hand on Richard's arm. "To move on from all the hate." I waited until she finished, then stepped into frame. "Perfect take," I said, clapping once. "Too bad it'll look awful in court." The camera jerked. Tiffany's smile cracked. "What are you doing here?" "Delivering something." I handed Richard the envelope. "Legal notice. Cease and desist. You're both being sued for defamation." He tore it open, eyes darting across the pages. Sweat glistened on his forehead. A twitch pulled at his jaw. "You can't silence us. It's freedom of speech." "Freedom doesn't cover lies," I said, "especially when they cost people their reputation and their clients." Tiffany crossed her arms, the faint chemical scent of her perfume cutting through the dust. "You think anyone believes you? You look pathetic." I stepped closer, lowering my voice until only she could hear. "Careful. You're still on record." Her camera light flickered, then went dark. Richard tried to reclaim control. "You don't scare me, Caroline. I still have contacts, judges, investors, men who owe me favors." I smiled. "You might want to check your inbox. Most of them just pulled their funding. Investors don't like headlines about adultery and credit card fraud." Tiffany turned sharply. "Credit card what?" I let the silence answer for me. The whine of a power saw filled the gap, shrill and final. Richard's face blanched. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said. "I paid for the rights, remember?" For a moment, nobody moved. Then I handed the rest of the documents to the cameraman, whose eyes widened at the letterhead. "Make sure she posts this next time." And just like that, the balance shifted. Tiffany's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of her. Richard turned away, muttering, his voice drowned by the growl of a generator. The crew went back to work, pretending not to listen. I walked to my car, the sun beating down on the blacktop. Every step measured and steady. My hand still trembled slightly on the steering wheel, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. By nightfall, the tide online had turned. Screenshots of the cease and desist spread faster than Tiffany's tears ever had. Commenters flipped sides, calling her out for lying, for clout chasing. Richard deleted his accounts. Tiffany posted a final apology buried under hashtags. And for the first time since the dust of that house settled, I felt stillness again. Marianne's text came just before midnight. Public opinion, 1. Richard, 0. Ready for phase 3? I stared at the message until a smile curved slow and certain across my lips. Always. Because taking back my name was never the end. It was the warm-up. He wanted to fight for power. But the one thing Richard never learned was every piece of the board already belonged to me. The morning after the cease and desist went viral, the world felt quiet. Too quiet. My phone was still buzzing with victory texts, but beneath the digital applause, something in me hummed uneasily. When Marianne had drawn up the first contracts months ago, she'd once mentioned the old family trust. Unused, but keep it on record. I'd brushed it off. That detail came back to me now, like a loose floorboard creaking in a silent room. I poured coffee into the same chipped mug I'd used through every stage of this war. The air smelled of burnt toast and rain. Outside, a siren wailed far away, thin and haunting. Then the phone rang. Caroline Hayes? A man's voice, official, detached. Yes? This is Detective Moore, County Sheriff's Office. Your ex-husband's filed a complaint. He's alleging property destruction and financial fraud connected to a shared trust account. The word trust hit like a slap. What trust account? He claims joint ownership. We'll need you to come in for a statement tomorrow morning. I gripped the counter. The ceramic mug clicked against the marble. I'll be there. When the call ended, the hum of the refrigerator sounded impossibly loud. I stared at the condensation on the window, one drop trailing down like a countdown clock. I called Marianne. Her sigh came through the line like static. He's found a loophole. Remember the family trust we set up when Logan was born? It's still active on paper. He's claiming some of your assets were bought using those funds. That's impossible, I said. We never touched that account. Doesn't matter. He's betting the judge won't see the difference. If it holds, he could take 40%. 40. The number flashed in my mind like a red stamp across every document I'd ever signed. Marianne lowered her voice. He's hired David Parker. The name tasted metallic. Parker was the kind of attorney who smiled while tightening the noose. The day blurred after that. Emails, scanned documents, the soft buzz of my printer spitting out evidence. At dusk, the office smelled of toner and coffee gone cold. I stacked folders until they looked like fortresses. Still, my pulse wouldn't slow. That night, I couldn't sleep. The ceiling above my bed glowed faintly from the city lights outside. I kept seeing the detective's badge, the word fraud stamped in bold. Every rustle of paper sounded like footsteps approaching. At 2 a.m., I got up and opened the old storage box that held my life's receipts, literal and emotional. I flipped through yellowed trust forms, my parents' inheritance documents, the original business filings. My hands shook as I traced the signatures, the faint smell of ink and dust filling the air. For the first time in months, fear felt real again, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, practical kind that steals your breath. What if he won? What if, after all of this, Richard walked away with pieces of my life simply because he'd found a line of fine print? My reflection in the dark window looked unfamiliar. Strong, yes, but tired. The kind of tired that doesn't sleep off. At dawn, I dressed in black, the color of control, and drove to Marianne's office. The hallway smelled of paper and coffee filters. She was already waiting, stacks of documents spread across her desk. This, she said, tapping the pile, is your shield. Bank statements, inheritance transfers, every transaction traced to you, not the trust. And if it's not enough, she met my gaze, then we go on offense. We expose his manipulation. You wanted justice, Caroline. This is where it gets messy. I looked down at the evidence, then at my trembling hands. I clenched them into stillness. I'm not afraid of messy anymore, I said. Outside, thunder rolled again, close this time. It rattled the windows as if the storm itself were impatient for the fight to start. He thought he'd found a loophole. He didn't realize he'd just handed me another weapon. Because if Richard Hayes wanted to drag me into court, then court was exactly where I'd bury him. Richard thought he could use the law against me, but he forgot. I'd spent 27 years learning how to make the law my weapon. The courthouse smelled faintly of varnish and nerves. Every sound carried: the rustle of papers, the echo of heels on tile, the low hum of whispered strategy. I sat beside Marianne at the defense table, the weight of my file heavy in my lap. Across the room, Richard leaned toward his new attorney, David Parker, that slick smile barely disguising the strain around his mouth. His cufflinks glinted under the fluorescent lights, the same pair I'd given him for his 40th birthday. When the judge entered, everyone rose. The gavel's first strike cut through the murmur like a heartbeat. Parker stood immediately. Your Honor, my client asserts that Ms. Hayes's assets, including the company known as Hayes Contracting, were established using funds from the Williams Family Trust, a joint marital account. We request recognition of equitable distribution. Marianne rose with a calm that could silence thunder. Your Honor, my client's assets were funded solely by her inheritance and documented business revenue. We have full financial records verifying the chain of origin. The judge nodded, motioning for the first witness. The procedural testimonies began: the accountant, the title agent, the appraiser. Voices droned, paper shuffled, pens clicked. The air felt thick with recycled air and tension. Every so often, the judge adjusted her glasses, jotting notes in looping handwriting. When my turn came, the bailiff swore me in. The wood of the witness stand was smooth beneath my palms. Marianne guided me through our timeline: the company's founding, the accounts, the property sales. My answers came steady, almost detached. I'd rehearsed every number, every transaction, until they felt like armor. Then Parker rose for cross-examination. His tone was honeyed, his questions sharp. Mrs. Hayes, he said, pacing, isn't it true that your husband, Mr. Hayes, attended business meetings, represented the company, and therefore contributed to its success? He attended meetings, I said, but contribution requires more than showing up. The courtroom chuckled softly before the judge hushed them. Parker's smile tightened. And you expect us to believe you did all of this alone? I don't expect, I said. I documented. Marianne slid forward a thick binder of records. The tabs gleamed like a soldier's medals. Parker tried another angle, waving a ledger, twisting timelines, but each claim unraveled under the precision of my answers and Marianne's quiet interventions. When he paused to shuffle papers, I let my gaze drift toward Richard. He sat rigid, his hand trembling slightly as he scribbled notes he'd never use. His jaw clenched, and for a fleeting moment, my anger softened into something almost like grief. How many years had I spent building this man's illusion? Feeding his confidence, smoothing his failures, loving him so carefully he mistook it for dependence? That thought stung, sharp, brief. But then I inhaled, straightened, and let it go. Grief had no seat in this courtroom. When Richard finally took the stand, he leaned into his story with theatrical flair. I built that company, he said, voice trembling with practiced sincerity. I may not have filed paperwork, but I was the face. The deals, the clients, they were mine. Marianne waited until his performance peaked, before sliding a set of credit card statements across the table. "Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, "can you explain why the company paid for jewelry and hotel stays in your name? Items corresponding with dates you were traveling with Ms. Miller?" A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Richard's eyes darted between the papers and the judge. "Those were business expenses," he muttered. Marianne smiled. "Of course, romantic dinners always are." Even the judge's mouth twitched. By the time the gavel struck for recess, the scales had tipped. Richard's narrative lay cracked open on the record. As we left the courtroom, cameras flashed outside, questions firing like gunshots. I kept my chin high, the faint scent of old paper still clinging to my hands. Marianne didn't speak until we reached the car. "You did perfectly," she said. I nodded, though my chest still felt hollow. "It doesn't feel like winning." She smiled faintly. "It never does. Not until it's over." I stared back at the courthouse steps, the echoes of our voices still bouncing inside those walls. The fight wasn't done, but something in me had shifted. I wasn't the wronged wife anymore. I was the woman rewriting the ending. He thought a judge's ruling would end it. He didn't know the final chapter would expose secrets he'd buried, even from himself. The verdict came down on a Friday morning so bright it felt almost cruel. The judge's words echoed through the courtroom, even after the gavel struck. The court finds no evidence to support Mr. Hayes' claim of shared ownership. All assets, including Hayes Contracting, remain in Miss Caroline Hayes' name. The sound of it, final, measured, was like air filling my lungs for the first time in months. Richard stared straight ahead, motionless, the skin around his collar flushed red, and one hand clenched so tightly around his pen that the plastic cracked. Parker leaned toward him, whispering something that didn't land. When the gavel hit wood a final time, it felt like the closing of a chapter I'd been trapped inside for decades. Outside, the sunlight was blinding. Cameras flashed. Microphones swung toward me. "Mrs. Hayes, how does it feel to win?" I paused on the courthouse steps, the marble warm beneath my heels. "It doesn't feel like winning," I said softly. "It feels like surviving." The clip hit social media within hours. By evening, the video had gone viral. My calm face frozen mid-sentence. The caption reading, "Surviving isn't losing, Caroline Hayes. But victory is a fragile thing, and peace never lasts long when men like Richard lose." By Sunday, the first rumor appeared. A post on a real estate blog. Anonymous source claims Hayes' wife hid money offshore. Then came the photograph, grainy, taken years ago, showing a much younger me shaking hands with a client who'd later been indicted for tax fraud. The caption was poison. Did Caroline Hayes build her empire on dirty money? For a few seconds, my breath caught, not because I was guilty, but because I recognized the tactic. He was trying to turn perception into weaponry again. I called Marianne immediately. She answered on the first ring. "Already seen it," she said. "He's desperate. The timing screams retaliation." "Do we counter it?" "Not yet. Let him dig." Her calm steadied me, but the ache behind my sternum wouldn't fade. I poured myself a glass of water, the ice clinking like a clock counting down to the next move. That night, I sat by the window of my apartment. The city lights bled through the glass, painting the room in fractured gold. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and faded into the distance. I opened my laptop and scrolled through the comment threads. Strangers dissecting my life like it was sport. "She looks too composed, must be hiding something." "Typical rich ex-wife, probably laundering money." The words shouldn't have mattered, but they did. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I felt it, that old, raw loneliness. The exhaustion of being misunderstood, even when you've done everything right. My hand hovered over the keyboard before I closed the laptop gently, the screen dimming to black. He wanted me rattled. Instead, I smiled, because what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I'd left a trail for him, a trap disguised as weakness. 2 months earlier, Marianne and I had created a decoy account, seeded with false offshore numbers and meaningless transfers, designed to look exactly like the kind of evidence a desperate man would leak to the press. All traceable back to a single anonymous IP. His IP. The moment he handed that photo to his contact, he'd signed his own confession. Monday morning, Marianne sent me a single-line text. He took the bait. I exhaled slowly, letting the tension slip from my shoulders. My reflection in the window looked softer now. Not the avenger, not the victim. Just a woman who'd stopped apologizing for surviving. But before I could savor the victory, Marianne called again, her tone low and serious. "There's something else," she said. "A file surfaced during the trust review. Something from 20 years ago, buried in the financial records under your husband's name. I think you need to see it in person." My throat tightened. "How bad?" A long silence. Then, "It's not about the company. It's about your marriage." The city lights flickered once, as if the world itself hesitated. "I'll be there first thing tomorrow," I said. I ended the call and sat in the half-light, the hum of the refrigerator filling the quiet. Somewhere deep inside me, a truth I didn't yet know was already starting to burn. For years, I thought I knew every secret my husband kept. I was wrong. What Marianne showed me the next morning didn't just change the story. It rewrote my entire past. Marianne didn't speak until the office door was locked behind us. The morning light cut across the blinds in pale stripes, landing on the manila folder on her desk. A faint smell of ink and paper filled the room, cold, sterile, and heavy. "It was buried in the trust audit," she said. I almost missed it. She slid the folder toward me. Inside was a single document, a scanned statement, dated April 14th, 1999. My name appeared nowhere, but Richard's signature curled across the bottom, like a wound. $500,000, she said softly, "transferred from a private account in your father's name to one labeled Hayes Holdings. No declaration, no record in probate." My pulse stuttered. "My father died in March of '99. Marianne nodded. "Exactly, which means Richard accessed that account after your father's death." The paper trembled slightly in my hand. "He forged it, or coerced someone to." Outside the window, traffic moved in muffled rhythm, horns, brakes. The thrum of a city, unaware that a lifetime's foundation had just cracked open. I sank into the chair. The air suddenly felt thin. He stole from my father's estate. Marianne leaned forward. "This changes everything. The funds from that transfer could connect directly to his company investments. It means he used your father's inheritance to build his empire." I let the words settle. For years, I believed I'd taken back what was mine. Now I realized I'd only reclaimed a fraction of what he'd already says. My hands clenched in my lap. "He didn't just betray me, Marianne. He built his success on my father's grave." Marianne's eyes soften. "We can open a criminal inquiry, but it will get ugly." I laughed quietly, though it sounded closer to a sob. "Ugly is all I've got left." The laughter died quickly. I folded the document, slid it back into the folder, and stood. He's going to see me, today. The construction site had grown quieter since the last storm of headlines. The air smelled of sawdust and gasoline, the steady rhythm of hammers echoing in the distance. When I stepped out of the car, Richard looked up from a conversation with one of his foremen. His expression shifted from irritation to disbelief. "Caroline," he said slowly, Don't you ever get tired of showing up uninvited? Not yet. I held up the folder. Do you remember April of 1999? He blinked. 26 years ago? What are you talking about? You should, I said. It was the month my father died, and the month $500,000 vanished from his estate. A flicker, barely visible but there, crossed his face. The tightening of the jaw, the dart of his eyes toward the workers nearby. I don't know what you're implying. You forged his signature, Richard. My voice stayed steady, but I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. You stole from the man who trusted you like a son. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You can't prove any of that. I smiled faintly. That's the problem with men like you. You always think no one's watching, but paper doesn't forget. For a long moment, he said nothing. The sound of construction filled the silence, hammering, metal clanging, wind snapping through half-built frames. Then he whispered, almost tenderly, "You're digging into things that will destroy you." I met his eyes. No, Richard, I'm digging up things that already destroyed us. His gaze hardened. You don't understand the people involved. I tilted my head, then enlighten me. But he didn't. He just smiled that old, rehearsed smile, the one he'd used at dinner tables and board meetings when he thought charm could outpace truth. Then he turned and walked away. As he disappeared behind the scaffolding, the sound of machinery roared louder, drowning everything else. I stood there, folder pressed to my chest, the faint smell of oil and sawdust mixing with the sting of memory. For the first time since the trial, my confidence wavered. Because behind that smile, behind that half-second flicker of fear, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not guilt, panic. And panic meant secrets, ones buried deeper than money. I thought I'd uncovered Richard's last deception. I was wrong. The next secret wasn't about business or betrayal. It was about blood. The courthouse felt different that morning. Heavier, expectant. The marble floors seemed to hold an echo of everything that had happened inside them. Verdicts, lies, promises broken under oath. I sat behind the plaintiff's table again. The same chair, the same hum of fluorescent lights, but the air felt charged. This time, the case wasn't about property or contracts. It was about the missing inheritance, the money Richard had stolen from my father's estate in 1999. Reporters filled the benches like vultures, waiting for fresh meat. Every lens was angled toward me, but I didn't blink. I'd learned long ago that silence could be armor. Across the aisle, Richard looked gaunt, the manicured edges of his confidence fraying. Parker, his attorney, flipped through files like a man searching for miracles. The judge entered. The gavel cracked once. Marianne stood. Your Honor, new evidence has been submitted. Authenticated bank statements showing a $500,000 transfer from the late Daniel Williams's account into a private shell company under Richard Hayes' name. She paused, letting the paper's weight settle in the room. The funds were used to establish the earliest assets of Hayes Contracting. Parker rose, protesting. Circumstantial. The transfer predates any formal incorporation. But the judge silenced him with a raised hand. Proceed, Ms. Grant. Marianne nodded and motioned for me to take the stand. As I stood, my palms felt damp. Not from fear, exactly. From memory. The smell of my father's study, cedar and pipe smoke, drifted through my mind like a ghost. I remembered the night of his funeral, Richard's hand on my shoulder, whispering that he'd take care of everything. And he had in his way. When I faced the courtroom, the microphones caught the steadiness in my voice, even as my throat tightened. Richard Hayes took money from my father's account after his death. He used it to build his company, then spent years convincing me it was ours. Everything I fought to reclaim was already stolen before I even knew it existed. A low murmur rippled through the benches. Richard's face twitched. "You have no proof. I authorized that transfer." Marianne turned, sliding forward the document with his original signature, crisp, undeniable, ugly in its arrogance. He stared at it for a long time, then slumped back in his chair. For the first time since I'd met him, Richard Hayes had nothing to say. The gavel struck once more. The judge's voice was measured, but final. This court recognizes the fraudulent nature of Mr. Hayes's financial activities. Ownership of all disputed assets will remain with Mays. Hayes pending investigation of criminal charge. The sound hit me like thunder underwater. Distant, hollow, enormous. I should have felt relief. I didn't. What I felt was the weight of everything I'd lost in the process. The years, the trust, the illusions I'd called love. When the hearing ended, I walked outside into the flash of cameras. The air was crisp, sharp with winter. I inhaled deeply, trying to feel what victory was supposed to feel like. That's when Marianne's hand touched my arm. "We need to talk, privately." Her tone was wrong, low, careful, rehearsed. We slipped into a quiet hallway, lined with portraits of judges. The fluorescent hum above us was relentless. "What is it?" I asked. She glanced around, then exhaled. "You need to brace yourself. The transfer wasn't only authorized by Richard. Your father's secondary power of attorney signed the clearance." My chest went still. "Who?" She hesitated, eyes glinting with something between guilt and fatigue. "Me." For a heartbeat, everything around me disappeared. The hum, the hallway, the echo of heels on marble. "You?" I whispered. "It was 26 years ago," she said quickly. "Your father trusted me. He thought Richard would handle the investments responsibly. I never imagined he'd—" I took a step back. The fluorescent lights flickered, throwing pale stripes across the wall. "So this entire case, this whole time, you've been protecting yourself too?" "No," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "I've been trying to make it right." The silence that followed was worse than any lie. Down the corridor, a reporter's camera flashed. The light hit Marianne's face, catching the sheen of tears she didn't let fall. My pulse pounded so hard I could hear it. Everything I'd built on truth was now balanced on betrayal. And it was her signature beneath his. I turned toward the door. "Then the price of truth," I said quietly, "is that no one leaves clean." And I walked away, the echo of my heels swallowed by the hum of the lights. The folder still clutched in my hand like a weapon that had turned on me. I'd exposed Richard's crimes, but Marianne's confession changed everything. Justice wasn't the end of the war. It was the beginning of a reckoning neither of us could escape. The rain started just after midnight, a slow, deliberate drizzle that painted the city in streaks of silver. I sat by the window, the same folder from the trial lying open beside me, the edges curling from too many hands and too much truth. Marianne's signature, Richard's forged seal, both burned into my mind like brands. The betrayal should have shattered me. Instead, it hollowed me, left space where fury and faith used to live. The apartment was dark, except for the low amber glow of a single lamp. The sound of rain on glass felt like whispers too low to understand. I should have been sleeping, but peace had become a foreign country. When the knock came, it didn't startle me. It was soft, polite, almost rehearsed. I opened the door halfway, chain still on. A man stood under the flickering hallway light, rain dripping from the collar of a charcoal coat. His eyes were clear and disconcertingly calm. Caroline Hayes. I studied him. He had Richard's height, Richard's voice, but colder, more precise. And you are? He smiled faintly. Robert Hayes, Richard's older brother. The name landed like a stone. I'd heard it only in passing. A black sheep, estranged for decades, living overseas. Even Richard rarely mentioned him. He nodded toward the chain. May I? I hesitated, then unlatched it. You've got 5 minutes. He stepped inside, brushing raindrops from his sleeve. The faint scent of cologne, cedar and smoke, followed him. You look like you haven't slept. Comes with surviving betrayal. His gaze flicked to the folder on the table. Ah, so you've heard about Marianne. My pulse quickened. You know about that. I know more than you think. He leaned against the doorway, perfectly at ease. My brother wasn't smart enough to pull off what he did alone. He had help, legal, financial, and otherwise. Marianne was just one piece. I crossed my arms. And what are you? Another piece? He chuckled softly, the sound low and smooth. No, I'm what comes after the pieces fall apart. The rain hit harder outside, drumming against the windows like restless fingers. I came because Richard's in deeper trouble than you realize. He said, he's desperate. He's been making calls. People who don't like being called. I'm not afraid of him. You should be. His tone stayed almost gentle. Desperate men are dangerous, Caroline. Especially ones who've lost their names, their homes, and their masks. I searched his face for motive. There was something unsettling in the way he watched me, like a chess player, measuring the next 3 moves. What do you want from me? I asked. He smiled, slow, deliberate. Information, and perhaps cooperation. Lightning flashed, white and blinding, followed by the low growl of thunder. In the split second of brightness, I saw something in his eyes, not menace, but calculation. I'm not aligning with another Hayes, I said. Your family's cost me enough. He took a step closer, rain still glistening on his cuffs. I'm not my brother, and I'm not offering an alliance. I'm offering balance. Balance? He tilted his head. You think Richard acted alone? Look deeper, Caroline. There's a reason Marianne signed those papers in '99, and it wasn't love or money. My throat went dry. What reason? He turned toward the door. I'll let you find it. But when you do, you'll understand that Richard was just a symptom. The disease runs deeper. Why tell me this? He paused, hand on the doorknob. Because if you don't uncover it first, someone else will. And when they do, they won't knock this politely. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving only the sound of rain and my pulse hammering in its rhythm. For a long time, I stood in the dim light, staring at the folder on the table. Marianne's neat signature glowed faintly in the lamplight, looping and confident. Not love, not money. The words echoed in my head as the rain turned heavier, drowning the city in static. And somewhere deep in my chest, under the exhaustion and disbelief, a new fear began to bloom. The kind that whispers you've been fighting the wrong enemy all along. Robert said the disease ran deeper. I didn't believe him, not until I opened the files Not until I opened the files hidden in Marianne's safe and saw whose name had been funding everything. The fire started just before dawn. I woke to the sound of sirens, distant but urgent, a pulsing cry that cut through the fog of sleep. Through the window, orange light bled across the horizon like a wound opening in the sky. By the time I reached the site, flames had swallowed what was left of the construction yard. Twisted beams glowed like molten ribs. Smoke rose into the gray morning, carrying with it the ashes of a name that had once ruled my life, Hayes Contracting. Firefighters moved like silhouettes in a dream, shouts drowned beneath the roar. The smell of burning oil and wood clung to everything, thick enough to taste. I stood behind the yellow tape, rain from the previous night slicking the pavement beneath my boots. Detective Moore approached, face drawn and weary. "Electrical fault, most likely," he said, "but we'll investigate all angles. We found Richard's car near the site." My heart dropped. "Is he?" "Gone," Moore said simply. "No body yet, but the fire was bad. Gone." The word hollowed out the air between us. He studied me for a moment, perhaps waiting for a reaction that didn't come. "We'll be in touch when we know more." I nodded. The truth was, I didn't know how to feel. Anger seemed too small. Relief felt cruel. Love was long dead. What was left was silence, deep and echoing. When the flames finally died, only the skeleton of the building remained. Steel bent, glass shattered, the ghost of an empire collapsing under its own weight. The following week blurred into interviews and statements. Reporters filled the sidewalk outside my apartment, shouting questions that bounced off me like rain on stone. Was it arson? Did she know he'd been at the site? Was this revenge gone too far? I answered none of them. There was nothing left to prove. Marianne came once, pale and quiet. Her betrayal still hung between us like smoke that wouldn't clear. "I never wanted it to end like this," she said softly. "Neither did I." She reached into her bag and handed me a small fireproof envelope. "This was recovered from the safe at the office before the fire. It's addressed to you." I turned it over. The handwriting was familiar, deliberate, precise. Robert Hayes, Sr., Richard's father, the man who had built the first version of Hayes Contracting, then vanished from the narrative of their family's success. Marianne left without another word. I sat alone for hours before I finally opened it. Inside was a letter dated 1983 and a single document, a handwritten ledger of the original loan that had started the company. The first line made my breath hitch. Loan, $25,000. From Daniel Williams to Robert Hayes, Sr., my father. The truth spread through me like light finding its way through cracks. Long before I ever met Richard, before any betrayal or trial, my father had loaned the Hayes family their first capital. Hayes Contracting, the empire Richard claimed as his legacy, had always been built on my father's integrity. I read the letter again and again, the words trembling in my hands. "Daniel trusted me when no one else did. I've tried to repay that debt my entire life. If this letter finds its way to his family someday, let it be known. The Hayes fortune was born from his kindness, not my ambition." I pressed the page against my chest. Tears came, silent and steady. It wasn't grief. It was release. My father's legacy hadn't been money or power. It had been trust. Something I had forgotten in my hunger to win. A month later, the investigation closed. The fire was ruled accidental. Richard was declared missing, presumed dead. His accounts were frozen, his estate in litigation. Robert Jr. disappeared overseas again, leaving behind only questions and shadows. Marianne resigned from law entirely. Her letter of apology was brief but sincere. I didn't forgive her, not yet, but I understood the weight she carried. Some betrayals were born from weakness, not malice. I sold what was left of Hayes Contracting to a worker cooperative, the same builders who had worked through the storms and chaos, the ones who had built every foundation I'd once signed my name to. They renamed it Hayes and Williams Restoration. It felt right, On the morning of the reopening, I visited the empty lot where the house once stood, the one I'd demolished months before. The land was still scarred, but the grass had begun to grow back, wild and defiant. The air was quiet. The wind carried the scent of earth instead of smoke. I knelt, pressing my hand against the soil. It was cool, damp, alive. "This," I whispered, "is where it ends." But even as I said it, I knew endings were just shapes we drew around the places where pain finally stopped echoing. My father's loan, my husband's lies, my own fire. They had all burned through me, leaving something smaller, simpler, truer. I stood, brushing dirt from my palm, and looked out toward the skyline, cranes and scaffolds cutting through the morning light. For the first time, I didn't see power. I saw possibility. The city hummed quietly around me, rebuilt from its ruins, just like I was. Everything Richard built turned to ash. Everything my father gave still stands. In the end, legacy isn't what survives us. It's what teaches us how to begin again. Caroline's journey may end here, but stories like hers never die. Subscribe and keep the fire alive.